How do you go from managing a small fourplex Airbnb to owning 7 hotels and an $8 million portfolio in just 3 years? Today's guest, Gideon Spencer, did exactly that after his life took a sharp turn with a health crisis in his family, pushing him to rethink everything. In this episode, he shares his journey from short term rentals to boutique hotels and the mindset that allowed him to grow quickly, along with the lessons he's learned about building something that lasts. This is the Leadway Wealth Builders podcast, where I, Chris Rickenbaugh, am documenting my journey in real estate and business while also bringing on high level investors to share their stories and how they built their businesses. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at chris.rickenbaugh. That's Chris.Richenbach. And if you're listening to this podcast, stay right where you are and give us a like and review. That's the only way this podcast grows. And you can also listen on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and Amazon. Now, let's get to Gideon. All right, Gideon Spencer, welcome to the Leadway Wealth Builders podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time to be able to hop on the podcast for about 30, 45 minutes talking about boutique hotels. I know you're kind of on baby watch right now, so we might have to pause the episode if something crazy happens. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. If everybody knows, Gideon's got a couple of hotels that he's going to be telling us about, but I want him to introduce himself. So Gideon, give us that 2 minute introduction about who you are and, what your business and portfolio look like right now. And then we can go back and figure out how you got there.
Yeah, so I'll give you the 30,000 foot overview. So basically, my background's in tech, and my wife and I were both from San Antonio, but we didn't live there at the time. So we wanted to get a short-term rental that we could just dip in when we were in town for the holidays. And so with my background in tech, I'm constantly thinking about economies of scale. So we wanted to buy a fourplex, fit as many doors under one residential roof as possible, converted them all to short-term rentals, and basically ran it like an automated boutique hotel. The property was ripping cash. Within a 4 month period, my mom, dad, and wife all became terribly ill, like
Wow.
life-threateningly ill. And it was an incredibly stressful period of my life. I wouldn't trade any of the lessons I learned for the world, of course, because there's so much wisdom that I pulled from it. But with that going on, I realized, A, life is short and I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. There's no reason as to why I should plan out for a super long life, because life changes, health gets crazy. And two, I realized that I needed to build a business that scales in wealth without me. So I saw the property was ripping cash. I said, how can I scale this as quickly as possible? And not only how can I scale this and buy real estate, but how can I build a company that buys real estate so that if anything happens to me tomorrow, my wife's standard of living would still be okay. Her health had limited her. She was effectively bedridden. So it was really gnarly. By God's grace, everybody's doing fine now, just to tie up that loose end.
Yeah, that's
But
insane.
yeah, but started focusing on commercial real estate. And over a few years, we're now invested across 7 hotels. We're operating one, and we have another one in the pipeline that we're hoping to tie up by the end of this year. So yeah, I just built that team that can drive things forward so that I can maximize my time and really get the benefits of that scale and having that equity and cash flow that fuel the business engine that moves forward and buys real estate.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so I want to jump back to, you said you got the fourplex going. So all of those are rented out, and then, all of your family basically got sick. And that was the big push to be able to get you into real estate. So at that time, were you working another job or you were straight living off the Airbnbs?
No, I was. Yeah, I was working a W-2. I was a product manager for a tech company out of the Bay Area. So I was able to work remote, which was really nice. But yeah, I was juggling the W-2 while renovating the property because we did one unit at a time. So we saw that it was ripping cash before we even had the whole thing done with the approach that we took. And then yeah, people got sick, so I was juggling sick family, renovating a quad, a W-2, and in that thick of it decided to buy a hotel. So it was just going all out, just full pedal to the metal. There was no time for breaks or sleep or anything. Also started posting content regularly around that time to build the personal brand because it's so high leverage, as you know. So yeah, just hit the gas. There were no brakes involved and full steam ahead. And yeah, we made it out.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that because you kind of put your back against the wall there. Everybody's sick, you're working a job, you're renovating. There was no other option but to go forward and being able to you know, look at the situation. How do we move forward? So, how did you go from, the Airbnbs to it's like, all right, how do I, leave my job and buy the hotel? What was the shift there? And, what was the education to buying that first hotel with the job and the fourplex and being able to jump right in?
Yeah, so I'd say the shift in mindset came from looking at the goals I had and the timeline I had, and the pace that I was going just didn't make sense. Like I said, okay, I want to be able to. I threw $1 million on the number. I said, okay, my wife, she's bedridden. I want to maintain her quality of living. If anything bad happens to me, I need to get things in motion to make $1 million within the next 6 to 9 months. And I didn't need cash in the bank, but I needed to have a machine that I knew would deliver $1 million. That was my goal. And I thought if I can generate enough equity in a property or via cash flow or something for $1 million, then my wife will at least have some level of comfort if anything happens to me for at least like a decent period of time. And that was my initial goal. And when I was looking at my real estate portfolio, I saw I'm not going to be able to hit those numbers like I want to, just continuing to buy short-term rentals, because I wanted it to scale much faster. Like I said, I want like 6 to 9 months to acquire $5 to $6 million worth of real estate so that I could deliver on that goal. And through that experience, yeah, just that was the shift in mindset as I was looking at what I was doing and I was looking at my goal and timeline and said, I can't get to where I'm going within the period that I want to go. The second shift that I took was I can't afford to do all of this on my own. I need a vehicle that will drive forward for me. It's similar to the 2 mile principle where if something is 2 miles away, it'll take you longer to get there than if it's 3 miles away. Because if it's 2 miles away, you may say, "Oh, I can walk," and you'll decide to walk, and it'll take you 40 minutes. But if it's 3 miles away, you'll decide to drive, and it'll take you 5 minutes. So shifting that mindset and saying, "I need to go bigger." I will say through my experience, because I've tried both, making $100,000 is significantly harder than making $1 million. And the reason is because of that 2 mile principle. If you sit there saying like, oh, my next milestone, I want to save up $100,000 in cash. That is grueling and painful. If you say I need to make $1 million, you'll look at that pace that you're going. Like let's say you can pocket, let's just say $20,000 a year. Let's say you're like a hyper saver, you have a decent W-2. You're like, okay, I can set aside $20,000 a year. If you say, I want to make $100,000 at that pace, you're looking at 5 years. And that's aggressive. $20,000 set aside is aggressive for a lot of
Oh, yeah.
people. Let's say it's more realistic, closer to like five to $10,000. We'll say $10,000. Now you're looking at 10 years. Who knows what's going to happen over 10 years? You could get in a car accident. You could lose your job. The economy could tank. A lot can happen in 10 years. So even at that pace, you're saying, okay, I can save $100,000 over 10 years, and it's high risk because a lot can happen over 10 years. If you say, okay, I want to make $1 million over 10 years, now what? You're going to spend 100 years to make $1 million at that pace? You're not going to get there at that rate. You have to think differently. And when you break that mold and you say, okay, I can't walk, I have to drive. Now you're starting to look for a car, right? But if you just say, I want to make $100,000, you're putting your damn shoes on and you're committing to spending 10 years walking. But if you realize it's way too far to walk, I need to find a car, you'll spend the first 6 months looking for a car, then you'll hop in a car and spend the next 6 months driving to where you're trying to go. And you'll hit that in a year. And that's effectively what I did. As I looked at the timeline, I said, I'm not going to get to where I'm trying to go at this pace with this model. I said, boutique hotels make sense, commercial real estate, I can raise capital, I can build a team. The hotel makes enough cash flow. It generates enough equity. I can add enough value in enough places that I can hit my goal in 6 to 9 months. So hyper focus there. Joined a community to be in a group of a high concentration group of individuals who were tightly aligned on their goals and could support each other through them. It's a big reason why I started my own community, because I saw the value in it and realized this is actually how deals get done. This is how people operate. We're biologically hardwired to operate in packs and tribes. Like, we are not independent creatures. Like, we are interdependent creatures that thrive off of communities. And so joined a community, surrounded myself with people who had done the thing that I was trying to do, people who their reality was my dream, to the point where my dream didn't seem like a far-fetched dream. It was just a natural way of thinking. The people I was hanging out with, they think about buying hotels the way regular people think about buying a sandwich. It's like, yeah, why wouldn't you be able to go buy a sandwich? You can just walk out your door and go buy a sandwich. Like, that's how these people think about hotels, and talking to them and shifting my thinking and building the relationships with people that mattered for what my goal was is what changed the entire game. So then I ended up partnering with the right people. We targeted a hotel, we took it down, and over the last couple years, yeah, we're now invested across seven and operating one, and focusing on the next one to acquire so that we can operate that one as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. That was a lot right there. And I want to you know, go back to what you said on the two versus the 3 miles, because that's something I was actually have a conversation with one of my private lenders today because he's thinking a lot bigger. And I said, through everything, I'm kind of going through right now, it's like I'm flipping houses. I'm looking to wholesale more. And I'm thinking, for me to make $1 million here, I'm gonna have to do a lot of deals. That means lots of cold calls, lots of time on the road. And I'm just thinking, for me to get there, I'm going to have to put in, 80 plus hours a week. It's not impossible, but it's a lot of time to where I said, I would rather have one business that's pumping out,
Yeah,
20, 30,000 a month. And, that sounds like that's where you're exactly where your mindset was. And being able to see that early on for me, I think that's going to be huge. So being around you guys, and we hopped on a 15, 20 minute call right around a year ago this time. And that's when I was just kind of getting my feet wet with flipping houses. I bought a couple. And, I remember saying, I don't really have like questions on the business side, but, mentality side and, who I'm around, that was the focus of our conversation. And that's who I really got around. Because then I found the people doing 20 to 30 deals a year and now 50. And now I'm around those people. And I'm thinking, man, for me to do 20, 30 deals, like that's gonna be pretty easy to do. So,
right.
I love the mindset there, and then being able to shift to the bigger, boutique hotel. That's gonna be the machine that's driving through. So I love that. But so being able to, piquing your interest of the hotels. So why didn't you go specifically into the commercial route or buying a regular business? What piques your interest about the hotel specifically?
So hotels get the best of both worlds in terms of cash flow and real estate benefits, like tax benefits. You got your depreciation. It's an appreciating asset, so it tends to be lower risk, but you still have great cash flow because it is, I mean, it's much more intensive in terms of the operation, but what comes with that is significantly more cash flow. So the reason why I went there was because I saw the model worked. It's like when you understand a way to make money and it just clicks for you. And for those listening who haven't found that thing yet that they can really make money with and it clicks, like, just keep looking for that thing, look at the different models. And that's what I did. So I saw the short-term rentals, I saw the numbers made sense. And then when I looked at how those numbers worked at scale, I realized that made sense for me. People can buy small businesses. I love the idea of buying small businesses. I'm invested in some small businesses myself, but those tend to be higher work, so, and higher risk. So if you're buying a business that can depreciate to zero if you don't operate it correctly, that is higher risk. The reward for that is if you do successfully stabilize it, it's higher cash flow. So generally speaking, if you buy a small business versus a small hotel, you're going to be able to cash flow harder with that small business, but it's much more difficult because generally speaking, there's such a wide array of types of businesses that when you acquire that asset, you have to be confident that you're able to solve a problem that the operator who's been working it for 20 years wasn't able to solve. And by solving that problem, you add the value in a new industry potentially, and you have way higher risk because that value can actually go to zero. With hotels, the value is not going to go to zero. It's very slim chances that it's going to go to zero. So like, okay, I can add value. Like I can hire contractors, I can hire a design team that will add value. And even if we don't operate it effectively, we will still be able to control the level of risk for this deal and sell it at a profit, hopefully at a decent profit because of the value that we've poured into the asset itself. So I liked the risk profile, but more than anything, that's simply the asset class that clicked for me in terms of building wealth through real estate, but also getting the benefits of cash flow and using that cash flow to add value because in commercial real estate, which is different than residential, the value of the asset is based on the net operating income. So when you really crank up the cash flow, not only are you pocketing that cash, but you're adding tremendous value to that asset.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So, you know, breaking down, so we got the overview of the hotel, the cash flow part, but for, people who don't understand, they think of a hotel as a Marriott, a Courtyard, or any of those brands. So what are, just to break it down simply, what are boutique hotels for those who don't know?
So, a boutique hotel is generally a hotel that has less than 100 units. We target 20 to 50 units on average. And they are properties that don't have a flag, is what it's called. So they're not part of a major chain like Hilton or Marriott. So they tend to be one-off properties that have more unique experiences. And we're seeing that in the consumer base. Consumers are more interested in unique experiences than even luxury experiences now. So they're branded separately. They often have some unique differentiator in terms of what makes them stand out, and they are smaller assets.
Okay. And then, as the smaller asset, where are you specifically finding these? Because in a boutique hotel, we're thinking coast of California, beach hotels, but they're all over the country. So if you're trying to find one, where do you start finding these hotels?
Yeah, so I recommend people look in tertiary or secondary markets. That's what we target. What we find is that those secondary and tertiary markets, which are generally smaller markets that still have strong travel demand, and we like markets that are within an hour and a half of a major metro because then you can do targeted marketing, you can pull in from that major metro. And generally speaking, those secondary and tertiary markets still have really great fundamentals. So like their supply demand is really strong. They're really strong assets. There are also some really popular secondary and tertiary markets that people from major metros love traveling to. And then on top of that, they're generally more accessible. So in terms of a purchase. So they are less competitive markets. You're not going to compete with institutional money. So these funds that have $100 million that they need to deploy, they're not looking at the $2 to $5 million assets in secondary markets. They're looking for the real prime time on Main Street, $50 million assets that they can acquire so they can deploy those large sums of capital. So what we look for is, yeah, those secondary, tertiary markets that are within an hour and a half of a major metro that still have really strong fundamentals and have older properties. We also like markets that have a limited supply. So we like purchasing in blue states that have a lot of regulation because it keeps competition out. So I'm a capitalist. I'm a big fan of the free market. I believe that even the little guys should be able to compete. I don't think that we should have super high barrier of entry. If somebody wants to go make a dream come true and they want to build a great life for their family and they're willing to hustle, I think we should let those smaller investors build up and buy short-term rentals and grow in an environment that supports them in doing that. Blue states do not support them in doing that. The blue states are very elitist when it comes to that. They only want the big dogs who can raise millions of dollars to win. And so, while I don't agree with that model because I think it really breaks down this like American dream of people being able to build up, it does create a lot of opportunity for people who can raise millions of dollars. So what my ethos is I push for the model where the smaller guys can grow and climb and there's less regulation so that people who are willing to work and pursue a dream can achieve it. But I'm making money in the blue states where they're keeping those people out. So I see it as like rob from the rich to give to the poor in terms of pushing for one model, but benefiting from the other model that does have that higher barrier of entry.
That makes sense for sure. Because I think a lot of people, you know, looking into real estate, they're looking for, you know, probably the easiest barrier of entry. So when they see those things where, it's a super high dollar amount to be able to get in, it's like they're looking for the smallest way. It's in kind of thinking that it's easier, but being able to find those areas of opportunity like you're talking about, it's like, hey, it is high dollar to get in here, but here's where your asset classes are to where you can kind of go under the radar, but create your wealth. And while we're talking about wealth, I listen to a lot of your podcasts and you talk about the greatest transfer of wealth in America. For those who don't know, what does this mean?
Yeah, so we have about 10 million baby boomers retiring over the next 7 years. And they own 25% of small businesses, many of those being boutique hotels. So if you look at the numbers and you say, okay, 25% of boutique hotels are owned by people who are retiring over the next 7 years, that's a massive transfer in wealth, a massive transfer in wealth. When we look at deals, about 75% of the deals are either being sold by somebody who's retiring or sold by somebody who recently inherited a property from somebody who passed away. And both of those create tremendous opportunity to purchase those assets. So basically, like the wealth is being transferred. As we die, that wealth is transferred. And we are nearing one of the greatest transfers of wealth in history because of that. So, like, and not only that, but it also creates a lot of opportunity for creative financing because you can incentivize a seller who's retiring to leverage seller financing at really great terms because it benefits them greatly because it defers their taxes. So they're paying less on taxes and they're waiting longer to pay those taxes. And then they're getting in a consistent inflow of revenue through interest payments and everything else. So it creates a lot of opportunity for creative financing to where everybody can win.
Yeah, everybody being able to win. We hear Pace Morby talk a lot about the creative financing, and a lot of people are trying to do it on those single family assets. And it's hard because that person, has invested basically their whole life, all of their money into this house to where it is the biggest asset for them. And, they don't want to do creative finance. Most of them don't. They don't understand it. And I've heard you talk about where, you get to these business owners who have these properties, who have these boutique hotels. It's like that's probably how they bought it to begin with. So they're a lot more educated to be able to sell it on creative finance. Is that how you're finding a lot of your deals, or are you, raising all of the cash to be able to purchase them? So how are you buying these?
So we're buying them a bunch of different ways. We always propose creative financing because creative financing reduces the amount of capital that you have to bring to the table, and then raising capital increases the amount of capital that you can bring to the table. So you always want to balance both of those ends of the spectrum. Like you want to have as little of a requirement to bring money and have as much money as you can possibly get to bring to the table. So in terms of where we find these deals, we find them all over the place. My social media account, I get deal flow all the time just because I've built a personal brand that tells people I buy hotels. And so I get off market deals sent there. We do a lot of cold calling, building relationships with people who own hotels who we know are getting ready to sell. So we'll just let them know, hey, by the way, when you are ready to sell, let us know. So they're constantly thinking of us. And then also on Crexy and LoopNet. So a lot of people say Crexy and LoopNet are where deals go to die in the commercial real estate space. It's basically like Zillow for commercial real estate. But what we've found is if you are incredibly quick to submit an offer on a deal on Crexure LoopNet, you can find good deals on those platforms. It's much more rare, but you can find deals, but they don't last long at all. So if you can send out an LOI within 24 hours, you have a decent chance of finding something there. Or if the property's been on the market longer than 100 days, because then the seller, they've gotten out of the honeymoon phase of how much money they're going to make and they realize, okay, this property is overpriced. People have stopped making offers on it. So the hype is gone and they're more likely to entertain offers that are at lower rates. So that's actually similar to what the property that we purchased in Solvang earlier last year, Solvang, California, right next to LA, is is that market, what that property was off market, but we stayed in touch with the seller. They said we're not willing to go down on price. We said, okay, that price doesn't work for us, and we moved on. But we stayed in touch, and about 6 months later, the 90-year-old lady who owned and operated it ran into some health issues, and so she reached out to us and said, hey, I'm done. I'm willing to cut back on price. So then we were able to negotiate the price down. So it's really just, thank you so much. It's really just creating these opportunities and being in as many places as possible so that you can put yourself in a position to be lucky, is what my friend says. He says, put yourself in positions that increase the surface area of luck. So there are places you can put yourself in. There are ways you can engage with people consistently that will dramatically increase your odds of success.
Yeah, being lucky, the more people are into this game, they realize that it's not luck. Being able to put yourself in the situation to where, you're always raising money for deals, you're always looking for deals, and when they come to you, you're not lucky. So I love the breakdown of that. And why one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you on was the mindset. The first time I listened to you and Brian, I'm like, oh yeah, love this guy's mindset. Just being able to break it down, like uh, you know, it takes a lot to be able to have somebody think that deep. And, I love the way you express that. So, um, and then, so looking for, the numbers in the deal, I think this is probably like asking for a friend. But for me, I always looked at, what are the specific numbers you're looking for in a deal? Is there a certain net operating income that you're looking for? Is there a certain gross? How are you analyzing these deals to where you are able to move that quick?
Yeah, so the quick answer is we do a layered approach to analyzing deals. So the first pass at a deal, it should be 5 to 10 minute napkin math to see if we're at least in the range of what the seller is looking for. I will fire off an LOI after doing 10 minutes of research on a property because I'm just trying to get my LOI at the top of the stack so that the seller knows that I am serious and interested about buying the property. I'll also include in there, hey, just letting you know, this LOI is based on the data that I was able to pull from CoStar. Would love to hop on a call to get closer to the number that you're looking for. So I'm doing a couple things there. Number one is I'm name dropping CoStar. CoStar is a tool that costs $25,000 a year, so only legit investors use CoStar. So I'm letting them know, by the way, I'm a legit investor and I'm serious about buying deals. The second thing that I'm doing is I'm saying this valuation is just based on data from CoStar. I'm not telling you your property is worth less. I'm telling you that CoStar data says your property is worth less. I would love to hop on a call with you to iron out the details to see why you think your property is worth more. So I will do quick 10-minute math where I'm pulling the property on CoStar. I'm looking at the data to see what does the market say this property should be worth. And then I'll make some assumptions. I'll assume, okay, if they're hitting a 60% expense ratio, which is reasonable, it's not conservative or aggressive. It leans a little bit more on the conservative side. But if they're an underperforming property, I want to assume that they're not operating that well anyway. So I'll say, okay, 60% of their income goes towards expenses. And then I'll run my numbers off of that because for anybody who's not familiar with commercial real estate, commercial commercial assets are valued based on their net operating income. So you take the net operating income and you divide it by the cap rate. The cap rate is basically a multiple in business. where if an asset class in a specific market is more desirable, it has a smaller cap rate. And the technical term, it's actually a capitalization rate. It's a rate of return that you'll get your cash on in that specific market. But that technical term you can throw out the window. You can basically think of it as a multiple. So each market, each asset class in a specific market has a set cap rate that that asset in that class is going for. So you take the net operating income, you divide it by the cap rate, that's the value of the hotel. So I'm just like ripping out quick numbers. If a deal comes online within 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to look up that market's cap rate. I'm going to make an assumption on their income and I'm going to fire it out with an offer and say, hey, I don't know if this is accurate or not. Basically, this is just what I pulled from CoStar. Would love to have a conversation with you to see if we can get closer to the number that you're looking for. And that's usually how I'll do it. So yeah, to answer your question, I'm looking for yeah, just the net operating income and then pulling the data on the cap rate to get the quick number. In terms of my criteria, like my buy box, I don't buy anything that's less than $2 million dollars because I want to make sure that the deal is big enough that it can generate enough income to support a team doing the work for me. So back to the concept of I want to build a machine that buys real estate. I don't want to go buy the real estate and work on it myself. Like no income is passive, but you can get a lot closer than most people think.
Yeah.
Like there's this whole ethos that's like, oh, real estate's passive. That's totally wrong. There's no such thing as fully passive. And then you have this other side of the spectrum that's like, oh, real estate's really freaking hard. Like you're taking calls in the middle of the night to change toilets. You also don't have to do it that way. Like if you go big enough, you can hire somebody else who answers the phone calls about broken toilets in the middle of the night. But you can only get that if you go big enough. That's why going big is easier. 3 miles is easier than two. You just have to break that mold, break that mindset, and say, you know what? I don't want to cold call people all day long. I don't want to change toilets in the middle of the night. Like, I just want to own a business that does all that stuff. But you can only do that if you go bigger. And for us, that's a $2 million threshold on an asset. If we can buy an asset that's worth more than 2 million or that we can get to be valued over 2 million, then it will be able to support a team that can do all the stuff that I don't want to do. And then I just hop on a call with them once a week for 30 minutes to hear how things are going and to fine tune the operation and support them however is needed. But I would way rather spend 30 minutes a week than always be on call to change toilets in the middle of the night and chase down tenants that aren't paying us and everything else. That's a nightmare. You don't have to deal with it if you go big enough.
Yeah, that was actually leading right into my next question is, why is doing a bigger deal like a hotel easier than these smaller deals? And, you're a professional at this because you basically just answered my question through everything. So, why you're doing a bigger deal, you're doing it because it's a lot easier to manage. And then the property managers or the self-managing, you said you're doing that because you bought a big enough asset to where it was probably in place already. And yeah, like, you'll probably have to do the hiring and firing a little bit, but you have that team to where, you're not folding the towels, you're not doing check-ins. But, is there a certain door count or a key count that you guys are looking for when you're acquiring a hotel?
Yeah, so we target 20 to 50 units in the 2 to $8 million range. And we're flexible on those depending on the deal, but that's generally what we're going for. And again, we're looking for deals in secondary and tertiary markets that are near major metros where we can be very targeted with our marketing and building a brand.
Perfect. Perfect. So, you know, Gideon, I appreciate you coming on and being able to break this down for us because, I hopped on one of your calls where you're breaking down the hotels. And, this is basically that same thing. You're able to break down why you're buying it, your story, and then, those deeper numbers for somebody to be able to, be interested in buying this and understand that they can do it as well. So thank you so much for, taking the time to be able to, come on the podcast and share the boutique hotels with us, because I think that's a big area that's coming up. And, just seeing it in my feed, it's one of those, really big asset classes that's coming up that people are getting really, really excited about. So definitely
Mhm.
go check out all of Gideon's stuff. And, if somebody wanted to follow your story, what you're buying, your portfolio, listen to your podcast, where's the best place to connect with you and to go?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on Instagram, Gideon Spencer underscore. So it's GIDEON SPENCER underscore. And that's the best place. I'm also on LinkedIn and on all the other platforms, but Instagram's the best bet.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, go follow Gideon, go follow, give him a follow. So, thank you again for listening to the Leadway Wealth Builders podcast. This was Gideon and Chris, and see you later.